Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we will be discussing topic number 8, which is all about nuclear hazards. To have a deeper understanding about nuclear hazards, the subtopics that we will cover for the rest of the reporting are as follows. Number 1, what is nuclear hazard? Number 2, sources of nuclear hazard. Number 3, major nuclear accidents. Number 4, impacts of nuclear hazards. Number 5, control of nuclear hazards. Number 6, nuclear waste management. And lastly is the precautions after waste disposal. At this juncture, allow me to discuss the first subtopic entitled, What is nuclear hazard? Nuclear hazard refers to the potential risk and adverse effects associated with exposure to ionizing radiation or contamination by radioactive substances such as radionuclides in air, water, or soil. So when we talk about nuclear hazards, the term that we will often hear is radioactivity. By definition, radioactivity is the spontaneous emission of particles and rays by an unstable nucleus. So in general terms, radioactivity is the transfer of energy into space from any source. Nuclear radiation is an energy that is released by elementary particles of the atomic nucleus that are caused by the process of nuclear decay. According to International Atomic Energy Agency, nuclear radiation can cause consequences to nature, human life, and facilities significantly. However, nuclear radiation could be both beneficial and harmful depending on its utilization. Here's an overview of the types of nuclear radiation and their key characteristics. So the first one is alpha particles. Alpha particles consist of 2 protons and 2 neutrons, which is essentially a helium nucleus. They carry a positive charge and are relatively large and heavy compared to other types of radiation. So they have low penetration power and can be stopped by a sheet of paper or a few centimeters of air. Alpha particles have high ionizing power, meaning they can cause significant damage to living tissues by ionizing atoms they interact with. Due to their size and charge, alpha particles can travel only a short distance in air or other materials. Next is beta particles. Beta particles can either be electrons or positrons. They carry a positive charge or negative charge and have negligible mass compared to alpha particles. They have moderate penetration power and can pass through air and thin materials like aluminum foil. However, they can be stopped by thicker materials such as plastic or wood. Beta particles have lower ionizing power compared to alpha particles but can still cause damage to living tissues. And it also can travel several meters in the air and can penetrate deeper into materials compared to alpha particles. Third are gamma rays. Gamma rays are electromagnetic radiation similar to X-rays and visible light. They are electrically neutral and have no mass. They have a very high penetration power and can pass through most materials, including thick shielding like concrete or lead. Gamma rays have high ionizing power and can cause damage to living tissues. And lastly, it can travel at long distances in air and materials depending on their energy. Lastly are neutrons. Neutrons are subatomic particles found in the nucleus of atoms. They are electrically neutral and have mass similar to protons. Neutrons have moderate penetration power and can pass through materials, but their interaction with the matter depends on their energy. Neutrons have high ionizing power and can cause damage to living tissues. And lastly, it can travel relatively long distances in air and materials depending on their energy. Now, let us proceed with the sources of nuclear hazards. The sources of nuclear hazards includes both natural and man-made sources. Basically, most radiation exposure is from natural sources. These include cosmic rays from outer space and emissions from radioactive materials in the Earth's crust, for example, rocks, marine sediments, etc. On the other hand, man-made sources involves any process that emanates radiation in the environment. For example, nuclear power plants. These facilities produce electricity through nuclear fission reactions. Next is nuclear waste handling and disposal. it may generate low to medium radiation over a long period of time. Next is the use of radioactive materials in defense weapon production. Nuclear weapon production may also release radiations from the handled radioactive materials, usually of high health risks. Next are the nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons produce immense explosions and release large quantities of ionizing radiation, leading to immediate destruction, long-term environmental contamination, and health effects such as radiation sickness and increased cancer risks. Another example are mining and processing of radioactive ores, which involves crushing and processing of radioactive ores and generating radioactive byproducts. Next is the medical uses of radioactive materials. So radioactive materials, as we all know, are widely used in medicine for diagnostic and therapeutic purposes. So example niya is X-rays, PET scans, as well as treatments for cancer. While these applications provide critical health benefits, kung improper ang iyang paghandle sa mga radioactive substances, it can potentially lead to radiation sickness or increased cancer risk for patients, especially healthcare workers. Next is the industrial uses of radioactive materials. Various industries utilize radioactive materials for applications such as radiography and research. So, ang ihang effect is similar ra gyapon sa medical uses nga if improper ang paghandle, it can harm the workers and the public. And the last example are the nuclear accident. Now, let us go over with the major nuclear accidents. So, reflected on the screen is the Chernobyl disaster. So, the Chernobyl disaster happened in Chernobyl nuclear power plant in Pripyat, Ukraine, and part of the Soviet Union. So, on April 26, 1986, during a late-night safety test, an explosion and fire released large quantities of radioactive particles into the atmosphere, which spread over much of Western USSR and Europe. So, it is considered the worst nuclear disaster in history in terms of cost and casualties. So daghan kaayong namatay, and also there is an acute radiation syndrome with long-term deaths from radiation exposure. Another disaster happened in Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant in Japan. It was triggered by a massive earthquake and tsunami on March 11, 2011. So the cooling systems of the power plant failed, leading to 3 nuclear meltdowns, hydrogen air explosions, and the release of radioactive materials. So, mao ni ang second nga pinaka-largest na disaster next to Chernobyl disaster. Third and last disaster is the 3 Mile Island accident, which is located in the 3 Mile Island nuclear generating stations in Pennsylvania, USA. So on March 27, 1979, a partial meltdown of reactor number 2 occurred due to a combination of equipment failure and operator error, which leads to the release of a small amount of radioactive gases in the environment. So kani siya nga accident is kanang pinaka-serious na accident in the US commercial nuclear power plant history. So although walay nangamatay or no direct injuries, kanang it leads to a widespread public fear and distrust. So nag-develop sila og mga significant changes or regulations of nuclear power plants. Let us move forward with the nuclear hazard effects. Nuclear hazard effects can either be initial or residual. When we say initial, it occurs in the immediate area of explosion and are hazardous after the explosion. When we say residual, it can last for days or years and may lead to death. By the way, the principal initial effects are blast and radiation. All organisms are affected from radiation pollution, and the effects can vary from mild to extremely dangerous depending upon the various factors such as dose, duration, and type of radiation. Some of the possible human health effects are listed in the screen. So the first one are the effects on DNA and mutations. So radiation may break chemical bonds such as DNA in cells and cause mutations. So ang mga effects ani can be instantaneous or prolonged or delayed types. So even basin ba gani nakari pa ni sa nato into future generations. Next is the general physiological effects. So exposure at low doses of radiations, specifically 100 to 250 rads, men do not die. So ang mga tao dili mamatay, but they begin to suffer from fatigue, nausea, magsuka, and loss of hair, but recovery is still possible. The third one are the effects on immunity. So exposure at higher doses, from 400 to 500 rads, the bone marrow is affected. Blood cells are reduced, natural resistance and fighting capacity against germs is reduced, blood fails to clot, and the irradiated person soon dies of infection and bleeding. The fourth one are the effects on tissues and vital organs. So higher radiation doses for 1000 rads kills the organisms by damaging the tissues of the heart, brain, and etc. Fifth are the occupational diseases. Few occupations that involve radioactive exposures are uranium mine workers, radium watch dial painters, technical staff at nuclear power plants, and etc. The sixth one are the effects through biomagnifications. Through food chain also, radioactivity effects are experienced by man. Last one is cancer. Cancer generation is the most typical health effects of radiation exposure, especially when high or moderate amounts of radiations are involved in general regardless of the exposure period.
Environmental impact. So first is the soil and water contamination. So soil contamination refers to the presence of hazardous substances such as radioactive materials in the soil, which can adversely affect plant growth, agricultural productivity, and pose risk to human health through food chain contamination. So, kaning soil contamination is maka-affect siya sa mga plants. Ang especially po sa kanang mga tausan nga nag-asa ra sa mga tanom o kanang mga magsasaka. And then sa water contamination involves the pollution of water sources such as rivers, lakes, and groundwater with harmful substances like radioactive materials. So magdulot sa siya o kanang panganib sa atong kalusugan. Especially most kanang number one nga sources sa ato ang environment is kanang water. And then biodiversity loss represent a decline in variety of species in a particular ecosystem or region due to environmental disturbances such as nuclear hazards. So pag mawala ang biodiversity, ang atong ecosystem is maguba. Next is radiation hotspot. So are areas with elevated levels of radiation posing health risk to humans, wildlife, and the environment. So sa kanang radiation hotspot is dapat yun siya ma-identify ug need sa siya ma-monitor para something mabawasan ang epektuan niya sa radiation exposure. And then sa atmospheric effects refers the impact of releasing pollutants including radioactive materials into the atmospheric zone. This can lead to spread of contaminants over long distances, affecting air quality and posing health risk to pollutants exposed to polluted air. And then lastly is the climate effects. So nuclear incidents can also have indirect effects on climate by releasing greenhouse gases and other pollutants. So these emissions can contribute to climate change, altering weather patterns, increasing temperatures, and impacting global climate systems. Nuclear hazard control. So first is leakage from nuclear reactors, careless handling, transport, and use of radioactive fuels, fission products, and radioactive isotopes. So it's crucial to be ensuring nuclear safety and minimizing the risk associated with radioactive materials. And next is safety measures. So safety measure implementing stringent safety measures such as regular inspections, maintenance, and upgrades of nuclear facilities to prevent accidents. Safety protocols include training for personnel, adherence to operational procedures, and the use of advancement technologies by monitoring and control. Next is preventive measures. should be followed so that background radiation levels do not exceed the permissible limits, and appropriate steps should be taken against occupational exposure. The last one is waste disposal must be careful, efficient, and effective power plants, research activities, and other nuclear operation. So, proper disposal, storage, and treatment of radioactive waste are essential to represent environmental contamination and public exposure to radiation.
So, good afternoon everyone. My name is Alexa Pedrosa and today I'll be discussing about the nuclear waste management. So, nuclear waste management involves the safe handling, treatment, and disposal of radioactive materials generated from nuclear power plants, medical treatments, and other applications. Effective management of nuclear waste is critical to protect human health and the environment from the harmful effects of radiation. So here's an overview of the key components involved in the storage of nuclear waste. First is the classification of nuclear waste. So first is the high-level waste or HLW. It is a highly radioactive and generates heat. Primarily spent nuclear fuel and waste from reprocessing activities. It requires cooling and extensive shielding. Second is the medium-level waste or the MLW. It contains higher levels of radioactivity and may require shielding. Includes reactor components, chemical sludge, and resins. It is stored in engineered. Third is the low-level waste or LLW. It includes items like clothing, tools, and filters contaminated with low levels of radioactivity. It typically stored on site at nuclear facilities in containers before being transported to disposal facilities. Next is the interim storage. Interim storage refers to the temporary storage of nuclear waste at a facility other than the site where it was generated. These facilities are designed to safely store nuclear waste for several decades until a permanent disposal solution, such as a deep geological disposal, is implemented. Deep geological repositories. So, a deep geological repository is an underground facility designed to store nuclear waste safely for thousands of years. So, it is located or built deep underground, usually in stable rock formations to help isolate the waste from the surface at the environment. So, nganong underground? The deep location provides natural barriers that protect against radiation and prevent the waste from reaching the surface or water sources. How it works? So, first is preparation. Engineers select a safe location and build tunnels and chambers deep underground. Next is storage. Nuclear waste is placed in specially designed containers that are highly resistant to radiation and corrosion. Sealing. The containers are placed in the underground chambers and the tunnels are backfilled and sealed to prevent any escape of radiation. Safety measures. Multiple layers of barriers like rocks, metal containers, and backfill materials ensure that the waste remains isolated. The deep location and natural barriers kay makatabang sa pag-protect against earthquakes, water infiltration, and human interference. Strict regulations and guidelines set by national authorities are crucial for managing nuclear waste safely and protecting both people and the environment from the potential hazards of radiation. The precautions after nuclear waste disposal. First is the monitoring radioactivity around the disposal sites. Second is the prevention of erosion of radioactive waste disposal sites. Third is the prevention of any drilling activity in and around the waste disposal site. Fourth is the periodic and long-term monitoring of such disposal sites and areas of naturally occurring uranium-rich rocks.